Lord, we praise you for bringing us here today. And as we go into your word, I pray that you will sober up our minds and our spirits to not miss out on what you've presented with us here, right? Because this text is not about us, but that doesn't mean we can't learn from it, God. And all because we're in the depths of 1 Kings, which many people fail to ever dive deep into, that doesn't mean that there's nothing here to be drawn out, God. And so I pray that you will give us that understanding. I pray for every person in this room, God, or anybody who might be watching online. I pray that you will meet them where they're at, and if there are any needs that need to be taken care of, that you will provide for them, whether that be soothing their stress, calming anxieties, or just, God, helping them focus on you. Sometimes that's all we need. We just need somebody to help us focus on you, and you're the one who's best equipped to do that. We love you, God. Help us repent of any sin that might be lingering, and help us free ourselves of anything that would keep us from directing all of our attention to you. May your Spirit guide us as we go into your word. It's in your name we pray. Amen. We have finally reached the last chapter of 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 22. We're going to cover it today. It's a long chapter, so buckle up. I think it's 53 verses long. And then, starting next week, I am not going to be the one who is leading us, because Sean here is going to begin leading us through 1 Peter. And he's going to be in charge of that. I have given him total creative freedom there, as long as that creativity is within the confines of actual Christian orthodoxy and does not stray into any known or unknown cults. And so if we start getting into that territory, I will quickly cut him off and say, "You're done. Please remove it. Go to another seat and just listen, please." So he'll be doing 1 Peter. And then after that, we will be hopping back in, Lord willing, in 2 Kings. Obviously, we never know what tomorrow brings, but that is the plan, at least. Right? Assuming we can get through this entire chapter today, because this is one of my favorite chapters, just because of one character. Right? There's one character. I put his name really big on the screen right here. He is one of my favorite characters in the entire Bible. And this is pretty much the only story he shows up in. But man, the impression he leaves, he doesn't even do that much. But I just love him so much. And so I'm excited to talk about this chapter with y'all. I say we just hop right in. We are currently dealing with the divided kingdom of Israel, the divided monarchy, where the united monarchy under Saul, David, and Solomon has split in two. Right? So now there's the southern kingdom of Judah, and there's the northern kingdom of Israel. The way that 1st and 2nd Kings is structured is that basically we are pinballing between the two kingdoms, and we'll talk about some kings over in Judah, then some kings over in Israel, then some kings over in Judah, then some kings over in Israel. And basically just every time one king dies, if another king reigned during the other time period, we'll go back over there and talk about them. Right? But things have been going very poorly in the northern kingdom of Israel lately, and so a lot of the kings have had very short reigns, while the kings over in Judah have been doing a little bit better, so they've had longer reigns. And so we've been in the northern kingdom for a while, because we had a bunch of kings who kind of reigned at the same time as, just certain kings over in Judah. And so we talked about several kings and several kingdoms, right? Several different dynasties. We are currently in what is known as the Omride dynasty, where there's a guy named Omri who had a son named Ahab, and Ahab is currently the one on the throne. And Ahab is a bad dude. Right? He is bad news. And we've been following him for several chapters. Really, the back end of 1 Kings is dedicated to Ahab. And we have spent more time talking about Ahab's reign than any other king other than Solomon in 1 Kings. And he's bad. But as you see by the smaller text on the screen there, today Ahab will meet his end. And Ahab will die by the end of this chapter. And then we will actually cut back to go see what the kings in Judah are doing, very briefly. And then we will cut back once again, and we will talk about Ahab's son reigning. And then the book of 1 Kings will end at the most awkward point possible, in the middle of describing Ahab's son's reign. And then 2 Kings picks up right where it left off. I don't know why they split it up like they did. It could have easily ended a few verses earlier, and it would have made a lot more sense. But it is what it is. That's how they did it. Honestly, it would actually make more sense for the beginning of 2 Kings to be lumped into the end of 1 Kings. Like, to me, if I were ending 1 Kings, I would end with Elijah going up to heaven, because then you would at least, that would make sense to me, because then First Kings is like Elijah's book, and that would make sense. But I'm not the one who separated Kings into 2 books, and so they didn't ask me about that when they did it thousands or hundreds of years ago. So I don't know. I guess they just didn't consider my input, even though they should have known I was going to be born centuries later and would have had an opinion. But so we're currently talking about Ahab, and Ahab has been, I was going to say a mixed bag, but really he hasn't been a mixed bag. He's been a dirt bag. He's just been bad news from the beginning. He married this woman named Jezebel, and they together led the people of Israel into Baal worship, and they even made this official by constructing temples to Baal. And they started murdering the prophets of Yahweh, and it's been a bad deal. God raised up a guy named Elijah to confront Ahab. And really, Ahab has been confronted by several prophets throughout his story, but he hasn't repented. And so we followed Elijah for a little bit, but then for the last 3 chapters in particular, we have been really focusing on Ahab once again. So we talked about him in chapters 20, 21, and 22. Elijah made a brief appearance last week in chapter 21, and then he kind of disappears off the scene. He'll come back at the beginning of 2 Kings very briefly, and then he will go bye-bye in a very unique way. But we are going to see Ahab's final big boo-boo today. And we will see where he finally, just like, it's the last straw, and he is going to die, right, because of what he does. And so that's where we're currently at. I think that's enough context, unless there's anything else that needs to be mentioned. There is going to be a king of Judah who is mentioned here, and we have not talked about him yet. But the cool thing is that that's because the Bible hasn't mentioned him yet. And after Ahab dies, we're going to cut back and talk about who this king is. And so if you're reading and you're like, who the heck is this king? Just wait. We will talk more about him once we get there. So let's hop into it. 1 Kings chapter 22, starting with verses 1 through 4.
So they lived for 3 years without war between Aram and Israel. Now it happened in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. Then the king of Israel said to his servants, "Do you know that Ramoth-Gilead belongs to us? But we are sitting still so as to not take it out of the hand of the king of Aram?" So he said to Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to battle at Ramoth-Gilead?" And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses."
Very cool. Very cool that you read that. Not very cool what Jehoshaphat and Ahab are doing. Probably need to clarify that. So what happens here?
First off, there's no war, but between I don't know if it's the kingdom of Aram and Israel, but there's no war for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good.
Yeah. So what is Aram? We've talked about this, but sometimes we need to remind ourselves. What's another name for Aram? That country. Nowadays, you probably know it better as this name. No, it's Syria. Syria. Right? So it gets kind of confusing when you get into 1 Kings and 2 Kings, because there's Syria and then there's Assyria. Right? So Syria is directly north of Israel. Right? So you've got Judah, you've got Israel, and then directly north of that, you've got Lebanon over here and Syria over here. Right? And so Syria, the capital of Syria would be Damascus. So, like whenever Paul's on the road to Damascus, that's where he's heading. Right? And so Aram and Syria, they're the same place. And then when you head further north, up into like the Mesopotamia region, if you know what that is, where the Tigris and Euphrates and stuff are at, that's where you get to Assyria, which is going to be a big player when we get to 2 Kings. Right? So that gets kind of confusing. But Aram and Syria, and the main people we're going to be dealing with in this chapter are Judah, Israel, and Syria. Right? So if you're just like picturing a map, it's this long strip of people, right? So Judah down here, Israel here, and Syria directly north, right? So yes, one thing we see is that there's peace between Israel and Syria, or between Aram and Israel. We'll talk about why in a second. What else do we see here?
Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, comes and confronts Ahab, who's the king of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And
How How about we just walk through it? Is that good?
Makes it better.
Okay. So they lived for 3 years without a war between Aram and Israel. First off, who is they?
So would that be Aram and the 2 kings of the divided kingdom?
So you might think that just based off of what I've already said. But really what this is forcing you to do is forcing you to look into the previous chapter. Right? Because if you remember, originally the Bible wasn't separated into chapters. And we also know it definitely wasn't separated into 1st and 2nd Kings separately, because Lord knows that if He'd inspired that, He would have separated it differently. That's just a joke. Just voicing my bitterness. No, so the chapters weren't divided how they are, right? And so it would have just flowed naturally, right? So the way that chapter 21 ended is it said, "Surely there was no one like Ahab who sold himself to do evil in the sight of Yahweh, because Jezebel his wife incited him. He acted very abominably in following idols according to all that the Amorites had done, whom Yahweh had cast out before the sons of Israel. It came about when Ahab heard these words that he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and fasted, and he lay in sackcloth, he lay in his sackcloth and went about despondently. Then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, 'Do you see how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the evil in his days, but I will bring the evil upon his house in his son's days.'" Right? And so who it's talking about is Ahab and his entire kingdom. That is who they is. Right? Because basically what happens is, remember in the last chapter, which we covered 2 weeks ago, because we didn't meet last week because I was out of town. What we talked about is that, remember there was this whole story where Ahab, he wanted a dude's vineyard, and he ended up having the dude killed. And then whenever he was ultimately confronted about this stuff, and basically he was told that God was coming for him, he kind of repented a little bit, right? And I mentioned at the end of last week that it was going to be very short-lived, right? Because by the time we get to this chapter, Ahab's going to be back to his evil schemes, right? But the end of chapter 21 detailed this repentance that Ahab had, and because Ahab repented, God said, "I won't visit calamity upon him just yet. Instead, it will be in his son's reign," right? And so chapter 21 ended with the punishment falling upon Ahab being postponed. And so this one picks up by saying, "So they lived for 3 years without war," right? Because basically the Arameans, they're the ones who are going to bring about Ahab's end, right? And we already kind of saw that in previous chapters. Remember whenever Elijah went back through the land, he was told to appoint a new king over Aram, right? And so we kind of knew that in some way Aram was going to bring about Ahab's end. And so since God said the calamity is not going to be there for a bit, well, this chapter opens up with 3 years of peace, right? So that it's basically just saying that what God promised has been fulfilled. Make sense? Okay. So they lived for 3 years without war between Aram and Israel, just like God suggested, right? So there's a time of peace, which also makes sense because if you go back to the previous chapter, chapter 20, you'll remember that Ahab actually made a peace treaty with the king of Aram, which God was not happy with, right? Do you remember that? Right, that was another big issue there. And that peace treaty is actually going to lead to the conflict that's going on here, right? So it happened in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. Now here's another interesting detail. Because think about how I just described the map, right? If you're looking at the map here, where's Judah? Like if there's boom, 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 where's Judah?
Yeah.
It's the one at the bottom,
Yep.
right? And where's Israel?
The middle.
It's in the middle, right? And so you've got the king of Judah going down to the king of Israel. Why does it say it that way?
Because he's probably going down a mountain into a valley.
Well, yeah, so this refers to what we talked about 2 weeks ago. Remember, whenever I said that whenever you look at the Bible, it doesn't speak geographically, it speaks topographically, right? And the difference between that is like geographically, you're talking about like a compass, right? North, south, east, west, right? And so whenever I say I am going, I go up to Oklahoma and down to Mexico, right? Since we live in Texas, right? That's how we would speak nowadays, right? Biblically speaking, that's not really how they talk, right? They talk topographically, and topography, that's like, have you ever seen like those cool maps, like the 3D maps, where it's like, they're elevated and like there's like valleys and stuff like that? That's topography, right? So topography is valleys and mountains. And where does the king of Judah reign? What city? Yeah, but what city in particular? Jerusalem, right? And biblically speaking, you could go to Mount Everest, but if you're coming from Jerusalem, you're going down to Mount Everest, right? Because even if, because Jerusalem itself, it isn't really this huge hill, right? But you know what makes Jerusalem the biggest hill? That's where God's presence dwells, right? And so, biblically speaking, you cannot go up from Jerusalem, right? You can only go down, right? And so that's just something that I find really fascinating. And so it says that it happened in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel, right? Because ultimately, if you're coming from Jerusalem, you're descending, right? You're going away from the presence of God, right? And I'm not saying that that's like a commentary on Jehoshaphat's spiritual status. I'm just explaining, I don't know, I just love that there's a theology behind, prepositions, right? Just the word down. It can tell you something about how Jewish people view Jerusalem. I think that's cool. So it happened in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. So he goes to visit him. And then the king of Israel, so who's the king of Israel?
Ahab.
Ahab, yes. And if you don't remember that, look over at the timeline here. Right? You see Ahab, Jehoshaphat. There you go. Then the king of Israel said to his servants, "Do you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us? But we are sitting still so as not to take it out of the hand of the king of Aram." So, what is he communicating there?
War, pretty much.
Well, yeah, he's saying that
That
war is coming. And the reason why is because it looks like the king of Aram has not held up his end of the deal. Right? Because remember how I said they made a peace treaty? This is what they said in the peace treaty back in chapter 20. Then Ben-Hadad came out to Ahab, and he took him up into the chariot. Ben-Hadad said to him, "The cities which my father took from your father I will restore, and you shall make streets for yourself in Damascus, as my father made in Samaria." And Ahab said, "And I will let you go with this covenant." Right? So, if you remember, Ahab had this victory over the Arameans, but rather than killing them, he spared Ben-Hadad, and he made a covenant with him. And Ben-Hadad said, in return, what I'll do is I will return the cities that my dad took from you, and I'll give them back to you so that you can have your cities again. And not only that, but you can even have some streets up in Damascus, right? Well, I'll even give you some of my own real estate up in Syria. So that's what he promised. And Ahab heard that and said, that seems like a fair deal. Politically speaking, sounds like a great trade. And so he says, sure, go back home. But guess what Ben-Hadad has not done? He didn't give him back the city, right? We don't know if he didn't give him back all the cities, but there's at least one city he has not given back. Ramoth Gilead, right? So he says, do you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us, right? Ramoth Gilead belongs to the Israelites, but we are sitting here so as to not take it out of the hand of the king of Aram. He says, this guy owes us this city. It belongs to us, but we haven't been doing anything about it. So he said to Jehoshaphat, will you go with me to battle at Ramoth Gilead? So what does he ask?
Will you help me fight the city?
Yeah, he says, you want to team up and go down there? Or go up there, whatever. Down, up, it's all the same thing. He says, will you go there with me to fight this, right? I want to tag team. Which this in and of itself is actually, it actually seems kind of cool in a way, because
It's kind of like they're united again.
well, it looks like that, right? It seems like they're unifying, because if you remember the previous chapters, whenever we talk about Israel and Judah, they were constantly at war. But here we have Ahab trying to seemingly make peace, right? And so that's what I'm saying. From a political perspective, Ahab actually seems like a pretty decent king. From a spiritual perspective, he's terrible though, right? But what we see is he's making peace with people. He makes peace with the Arameans. He's making peace with Judah. From an external perspective, this looks great. And Jehoshaphat sees this, and he's like, sure. He says to the king of Israel, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. Great. Right?
It
Why not?
may not have been God's will, because they might have been doing something bad.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Right?
Get into.
As the king of Judah, it really isn't actually up to Jehoshaphat whether or not he goes into battle. Ultimately, every decision has to belong to Yahweh, right? And as people who've been reading Ahab's story, we have very good reason to think that God is not on Ahab's side in this battle. right? Because Ahab is, he's not a good dude, right? He has not been worshiping Yahweh, right? God gave him 3 years of rest, but now here Ahab is going and trying, so not only did Ahab make a covenant he wasn't supposed to make, but now he's actually going and enforcing that covenant by waging war against the people he made peace with. So he's actually kind of breaking the covenant, and you could argue that Aram broke the covenant first, but still, Ahab is kind of returning back to his old ways, right? And so we have good reason to think God is not going, yes, God might have allowed 3 years to pass, but that doesn't mean that he's just going to follow Ahab into battle, right? And so for Jehoshaphat, he should probably have waited a second before he said this. Yes?
Ahab is causing Jehoshaphat to sin, pretty much. It's like setting him up for failure.
Exactly. And that's the interesting thing. We're going to see this whenever we actually talk about Jehoshaphat at the end of this chapter. Jehoshaphat's actually a pretty good king, right? His father Asa was a really good king, and Jehoshaphat, he might have been even better, right? So Jehoshaphat in general is a good king, but we're going to see that Jehoshaphat kind of makes some mistakes here, and I think his first big mistake is that he was too quick to jump the gun, right? And you can probably see why he did, right? I mean, because we already talked about it. It looks good, right? Israel and Judah reuniting. I mean, at face value, that sounds great, right? I mean, yeah, this is obviously God's ideal. He doesn't want his people to be divided. He wants them to be united. But it can't simply be a political alliance. The only thing that should draw them back together is faithfulness to Yahweh. And Ahab is not doing that, right? So really, Jehoshaphat should have probably said, I'll go with you if you turn back to Yahweh. But he didn't do that. Instead, he kind of jumped the gun too quick, and he said, I am as you are. He says, you know what? You're as good as my king, right? Let's maybe slow down your roll there, Jehoshaphat. I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses your horses, right? He says, you can come in and honestly, what's mine is yours. Mi casa es su casa. Mi army is su army. Right? That's what he's communicating here, right? In many ways, it kind of reminds me of the Ruth talking to Naomi, right? Where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God.
It does.
Well, it sounds really good whenever a pagan Moabite is saying that to a Jewish person. It does not sound good whenever a faithful Jewish person is saying that to a Baal worshiper, right? It kind of changes the connotation because now we have Jehoshaphat, the faithful king, allying himself with an unfaithful idolater.
You could say it's like the blind leading the faithful or something.
Yeah,
Like,
well,
maybe, I
yes.
guess what I was trying to say is like the blind leading the blind, but that wouldn't really be a correct analogy.
Well, it is the blind searing out the eyes of those who can see. That's kind of what's happening.
Okay.
It's the blind making other people blind.
I don't know if it's relevant or not, but I guess it makes me think of two previous stories, just the last couple verses. But with the covenant thing, it kind of makes me think of King Saul with the Gileadites a little bit.
Mhm.
It's a bit different, but I don't remember if the chapters made it clear or not whether the covenant itself was not, he shouldn't have done it. But regardless, Saul broke his covenant with the Gileadites. Do you remember that?
I'm trying to remember which chapter.
It was towards the end because I think it.
Oh yes, and in the epilogues.
Yeah, it was in the epilogues because
yes.
Saul broke the covenant
And David
with
had
the
to go fix
Gileadites,
it.
and David had to
Yeah.
go fix it.
Yeah.
And it was regardless of whether the covenant itself was sinful, because God did say not to make covenants with the Canaanites, but
Yeah.
either way, he still broke the covenant that
Yeah.
he made. And then was it
Jephthah?
Jephthah?
Yeah.
Same thing, stupid covenant, but still had to honor it.
Yeah.
And then the second part I was thinking of, it's also not really a 1-for-1, but it makes me think of the beginning of Judges with Simeon and Judah.
Mm-hmm.
Who shall go up first? Judah, and then Judah goes to Simeon and says, will you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Yeah, yeah. And I think to the first thing you were saying there, I like that you're making those connections because what these different stories are teaching us is something that I think in our culture we typically fail to recognize. It's the importance of words, and not simply the importance of words in regards to speech, right? Specifically in regards to promises, right? The Bible says plenty about speech, and we talk about that all the time in churches, right? Be careful with your tongue, be careful what you say. That's the way we talk about all the time. But the story of Jephthah, the story with Saul, the story here, these all reinforce other things that the Bible talks about that we really don't talk about a whole lot, right? It's better to not make a vow than to make a vow and not keep it, right? The idea of, like, nowadays we're like, oh man, I made a promise, but, later on I realized I shouldn't have made that promise, and so, like, I'm going to break it. It's like, whoa! According to the Bible, it's like you don't do that, right? You shouldn't have made the promise, but now that you made the promise, you got to deal with the consequences of your actions. Because, like to break a promise is to, like, not only are you, like, now you're sinning twice, right? And not only are you sinning twice, but you're ruining any opportunity of anybody ever trusting you again. And you're spoiling your word. And so, like, Jephthah, dude made a stupid promise, but he ended up having to kill his kid over it. I'm not saying killing his kid was right, but I mean, obviously everybody wants the daughter to be spared, but even the daughter recognized, you got to do it. You made a promise to God, right? And the cool thing is that, with humans, you can just probably talk to them, be like, hey, dude, I made that promise. Like, I thought about it. Can I not do that? But with God, it's like, you're making a sacrifice, right? So, all right, who's going to say something? Somebody's raising their hand.
Me.
Yeah.
All I was going to say was, in this situation, it's like the blind leading the seeing. Because Jephthah was going along with Ahab, and Ahab was the guy that was blind, and Jephthah was the guy that was seeing. Yeah.
Which is a very ironic picture if you just imagine that in your head, right? It's like a blind person leading a seeing eye dog. And you're kind of like, interesting. Like, that seems reversed. Okay. And so this is setting it all up. But very quickly, what we're going to see is that Jehoshaphat's going to recognize, maybe I hopped into this too quick, right? And so, the things we're talking about here, Jehoshaphat's going to realize it, seemingly, but at the same time, he's going to recognize it's better to not make a vow than make a vow and not keep it. And he's already told Ahab, what's mine is yours. And so he's going to follow through with this, but you can tell that he's going to begin to second guess things. So this is what we read.
Moreover, Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, please inquire first for the word of Yahweh. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said to them, shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I refrain? And they said, go up, for the Lord will give into the hand of the king. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not yet a prophet of Yahweh here that we may inquire of him? And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, there is yet one man by whom we may inquire of Yahweh, but I hate him, because he doesn't prophesy good concerning me, but evil. He is Micaiah, son of Imlah. But Jehoshaphat said, let not the king say so. Then the king of Israel called an officer and said, hasten to bring Micaiah, son of Imlah. Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, were sitting each on his throne, clothed in their royal garments, at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria. And all the prophets were prophesying before them. And Zedekiah, the son of Cheaniah, made horns of iron for himself and said, thus says Yahweh, with these you will gore the Arameans until they are consumed. All the prophets were also prophesying thus, saying, go up to Ramoth Gilead and succeed, and Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king.
I feel like those prophets are trying to kiss the king's butt at this point. They're just like, go, do it. I want to see something.
Yeah, Jehoshaphat's kind of thinking the same thing. Jehoshaphat's like, this seems awfully convenient. What's that?
A little sketchy.
Yeah.
It's like you going into a used car lot and then you do a test drive and you hear all these noises and the salesman it's a great car, isn't it? Right? I mean, it runs smooth, it shifts great.
Yeah. Well, do you know how difficult it is to get 400 people to agree on one thing? Yeah. Whenever they're all agreeing on the same thing, you're kind of thinking, they seem to have ulterior motives here. Yes. But let's walk through it. I love this story. I can't wait. The setup for Micaiah is so good. He just shows up on the scene and he just gets his job done, just moves along, and it's great. Okay. Moreover, Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, please inquire first for the word of Yahweh. If I were Jehoshaphat, I would have reversed that order, right? Before I told him that what's mine was his, I would have said, let's inquire of God first. But Jehoshaphat, I don't know, maybe he was nervous, maybe he kind of like got like, oh wow, like I wasn't expecting this offer. He accidentally gets the order wrong, and he makes a promise before inquiring of Yahweh. But then seemingly he does second guess himself. He's like, I just made a big promise. You know what? Before we go to battle, can we inquire of Yahweh and just like see if he's behind this? The issue is that Ahab doesn't give a diddly squat what Yahweh wants, right? And so really the only one who cares about this is Jehoshaphat. But I think Jehoshaphat's just kind of holding out like, oh, well, maybe if we hear from Yahweh, that like maybe that'll stop Ahab, right? Like if Yahweh's not behind this, I've got to try to stop this, right? So Jehoshaphat seems like, he's acting in wisdom, but it's like a little too late. So he says, please inquire first of the word of Yahweh, right? So he is a good king. He's just a little foolish here. Let's ask of God. Let's see if God wants us to do this before we start. Like, I know, like, it's very easy for us to think, okay, there's two of us, let's go fight this battle. But God needs to be behind us if we're going to go win this thing. And then the king of Israel, he gathers the prophets, right? He's like, of course. I wasn't going to go to battle without inquiring the word of Yahweh. Hey, go get those guys. Right? Like, he's just like, yeah, go on, get the prophets. So the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said to them, shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I refrain? Now, I've got a little bit of a theory here. Before I share my theory, what were you going to say, Rocky?
I mean, how's there 400? I thought he killed them all.
So this is an interesting thing. This kind of ties into my theory. So we know that almost all the prophets of Yahweh were killed. Right? Remember Elijah, just a few years earlier, was being like, I'm the only one left. And God's like, well, no, I think he did say there were, 700? Right? Was that how many there were?
It was quite a bit.
I think there were 700, right? So that's good. I mean, that could have been, I might get the number wrong there. Let me check real quick. That's going to really bother me. He says, I will leave 7,000 in all Israel. But I don't think that was just talking about prophets. I think that was talking about, like, inhabitants or, like, fighting men or something like that. Mm-hmm. I was trying to remember how many people, Obadiah. I was trying to remember how many people Obadiah, how many he held, like, he hid away.
Of 100 or 1,000.
Yeah. 100.
Yeah, 100.
Okay, so we know that there are at least 100 prophets of Yahweh, but we don't know about there being 400. That does seem a bit excessive. However, this ties into my theory. Remember Mount Carmel, which is the same story where we read about there being 100 prophets of Yahweh, because that's when we read about Obadiah, hiding them?
With the prophets of Baal?
Well, yeah, so at Mount Carmel, we read that there were 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. And we read that whenever Elijah gathered everybody at Mount Carmel, who came? It was the 450 prophets of Baal. We never read about what happened to the 400 prophets of Asherah, right? It never mentions them. And I'm not saying that these are the same prophets. I'm just saying that it seems very convenient that it's the same number, right? Because we never saw what happened to those 400 prophets of Asherah. Whenever we were going through the chapter, we kind of speculated that maybe they were there too. But I would imagine that if they were there, it would have mentioned it. And so for all we know, it could be the same people, right? In which case, that would explain why it tells us the specific number, right? It's like, yeah. You want to know who those 400 prophets of Asherah were? Boom. But Jehoshaphat doesn't know that, right? And so no matter what we're going to see is that these are false prophets, right? So whether they're prophets of Yahweh, prophets of Asherah, it doesn't matter. They're false prophets either way. The main thing I want to highlight is that there is a contrast between this and what happened at Mount Carmel. Because at Mount Carmel, it was a very easy situation to interpret, right? You literally had a prophet of Yahweh over here, prophets of Baal over here, and it was very clear that it was a test to see who was a true prophet, right? It was mano y mano, like they were just going against each other. It was Baal versus Yahweh. Well, here it's a lot more subtle. Because now you have all these people here, and all of them are going to claim to speak on behalf of Yahweh, right? And so now you just got to figure out who's actually speaking on behalf of Yahweh, right? So it's a little more malicious and sinister, right? Because it's like, ooh, it's not, we're not on top of a hill, waiting for fire to cast down from heaven. We're just in like a palace. We're in like a courtroom, and we're just going to see whose word comes out on top. And we have to kind of read the room, and it's there's more political intrigue behind it, right? It's not as much of a spectacle. It's more of almost like a detective story, right? Sherlock Holmes is sitting there trying to figure out who's telling the truth. And so the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and he said, "Shall I go against Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall I refrain?" Right? So Ahab gets them together, and he asked the 400 men, "What do y'all think? Should I go to battle, or should I stay back from battle?" And they said, "Go up, for the Lord will give into the hand of the king." There's a few things about this that I think are significant. What do y'all notice?
About the response.
Mm-hmm. It's worded kind of weird.
Go up. I mean, go down.
Yeah, well, I think it's just go up to battle. So the first thing that I notice is that they don't use the word Yahweh here. They just use the word Lord, right? Which is the word Adonai, right? So it says, "Shall I go up against Ramoth-Gilead?" And they say, "Go, for Adonai will give into the hand of the king." Well, Adonai just means like Lord in general, right? So is Yahweh saying this will happen, or somebody else?
So I guess Baal could be Lord.
Yeah, Baal could be Lord. Asherah could be Lord. Who's telling you that this is going to happen? Right? But then it's also kind of vague because, so some translations will say, "We'll give it into the hand of the king," in which case it would suggest like the city. But Hebrew doesn't have that like direct object there. So that's why I took out the word "it" there. So it technically says, "Go up, for the Lord will give into the hand of the king." They don't specify what's being given into whose hand. Right? The king is very general. Right? Technically, this battle could go either way, and they're technically correct. Right? Because if the city is delivered into the hand of Ahab, well, then they're correct. The Lord gave the city into the hand of the king. But if Ahab's life is given over to the king of Aram, they're also correct. Go, for the Lord will give your life into the hand of the other king. Right? So it's a very vague statement. They don't specifically say, "Yes, the thing you asked for is going to happen," which is really how false prophets work all the time. Right? Vagueness is the secret recipe. Right? Because if you're vague, you can say whatever you want. Right? "I see it raining in the near future." Okay, well, how near are we talking? Are we talking like 5 minutes, or are we talking 3 years? Right? I mean, like if you can be vague, I mean, you can convince anybody you're a prophet. Right? As long as you just say it, it's like, "Shall I go up? Go up. Will the Lord give into the hands of the king?" Yes, he will. You want to be more specific? So what I'm trying to highlight here is that they're being very vague. And I think this is going to be the thing, well, this is one of the things that's going to set off the warning bells in Jehoshaphat's ears. Yes?
I mean, normally they would say Yahweh, not
Yes.
the word. Normally,
Well, especially if they're genuine prophets. Right?
Yeah.
The thing is, like, we say the Lord all the time. But for a prophet, they usually say, "Thus says Yahweh." And that's what one false prophet's going to do in a second. He's going to say, "Thus says Yahweh." In which you're like, whoa, this is getting even more confusing. Right? But these guys say, "Go up, for the Lord will give into the hand of the king." And so they seem to give an affirmative. That yes, this is a good thing. But Jehoshaphat hears this, and something's not sitting right with him. So once again, he's a good king, but he's foolish. Right? The warning signs are going off in his head. He is getting red flag after red flag, but he's still going through with this. And so Jehoshaphat says, "Is there not yet a prophet of Yahweh here, that we may inquire of him?" It seems like he's seeing through the ruse. He's like, "Okay, I want to know the word of Yahweh, and I noticed that you just got together prophets, and I noticed they didn't say the word Yahweh in there. I specifically want a prophet of Yahweh. Do you have any of those?" Right? That's what I'm looking for. Right? I don't want just a prophet. I want one who is going to give me the word of Yahweh. Can you give me that? It's like, ooh. I think there's also another thing that Jehoshaphat probably picks up here. I think he realizes that it's not ever this simple with God. Right? In the sense of, like imagine, because ultimately, Ahab is asking for something that he desires. Right? Usually whenever you're asking for something that you desire, it's not usually a unanimous yes, absolutely, without any like warnings, right? God, can I have a mansion? Yes. No, well, I think what Jehoshaphat's noticing is that this is awfully prosperity theology leading, right? It's like, well, isn't that convenient? You asked these guys, and they told you you're going to be victorious. You're the king. They have every motive to lie to you, right? They want to kiss your butt, right? They want to suck up to you. They want to make you happy. Nobody wants to share bad news with the king. And so these guys have every reason to lie, and they have no reason to tell the truth if the news is bad. So he's looking at this, and he's like, it's not usually that simple. Usually if God is saying something favorable, he usually follows it up with like a warning. Yes, you can go up, but be careful that you do not turn away from Yahweh. So, like he would say something like to prove that it's from him. But instead it's like, yes, God will be with you, and he will win your battles for you, and you will get through this storm, and you will make it out of this valley. God has plans to prosper you, to give you hope and a future. Oh, sorry, that wasn't them. That was just a lot of modern preachers. But that's how he's kind of speaking here, right? Like the prophets are speaking, and Jehoshaphat's hearing this. He's like, like it's just not sitting right with him. Ben, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, all I was gonna say is we normally as humans like good news, like good positive news rather than negative bad news.
And that's because we're very Ahab-like, as we will see. So, sorry.
No, you're good. I don't know. This is like off topic or like not really like relevant enough, but for some reason this like little story here, it also in a different way reminds me of like Samuel going to anoint David, like him like looking at the sons and saying like, is there like another son?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, that actually makes Jehoshaphat look pretty good. Because Jehoshaphat's actually like seeing through the external appearance and kind of looking to the heart.
I don't know if that's really like relevant here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see it because it almost like we see God being faithful to Jehoshaphat behind the scenes. Because we see Jehoshaphat, he immediately agreed to something very foolish, but it's like God is almost taking care of him through this and like helping him like see through the ruse. Mm-hmm. And so he says, is there not yet a prophet of Yahweh that we may inquire of him? And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, there's yet one man by whom we may inquire of Yahweh, but I hate him, because he does not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. He is Micaiah, the son of Imlah. So this goes to what Ben was saying. Humans don't like bad news, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's like, and you've probably heard people say this about churches, right? I just don't like going to that church because, like, the pastor, like, I don't know, he talks about hell. And every time I go, it's like he's convicting me over another sin. But the issue is, like, okay, the pastor might be doing that, and maybe the pastor is too focused on that, but, like, really the big question is, do you need to be convicted, right? If every time you're going there and you're getting convicted, maybe that's not the pastor's fault, maybe that's your fault, because maybe you're not repenting, right? With Ahab here, he blames Micaiah for something that was actually his fault, right? Micaiah would say a lot more positive stuff if Ahab would simply repent, right? And that's the whole thing. Ahab, he never takes responsibility, right? Remember with Elijah? You troubler of Israel. Bro, you're the one causing trouble to Israel. Elijah's trying to help. He's trying, like, that's like a doctor going to perform surgery on you, and you start, like, cussing at them, being like, you hate me. What are you talking about? This person's coming to try to help you.
Yes.
You're the one who went and ate 30 million Twinkies and had them gushing out your nose. Right? Like you're the one who caused the problem. They're trying to fix the problem that you caused. Right? And so he doesn't like Micaiah because Micaiah is telling the truth to him. And people often don't want to hear the truth. They want to hear something that will make them feel good. They want to live in their sin and have people tell them they're doing a great job. Right? That's what they want to do. And that's why prosperity theology takes off so much, right? Because, you can go live in sin and indulge in the desires of the flesh, and then you can go to church and have your pastor telling you that God is happy with you, and he wants to prosper you despite the fact that you are totally rebelling against him. And so people, they want to have their cake and eat it too. I think I've talked about it before. I hate that stupid phrase, because who wants a cake and doesn't want to eat it, right? I mean, like, it goes part and parcel with getting a cake. Like, if I'm going to get a cake, I want to eat it as well. I don't want to just have a cake to look at it, but you get what I'm saying, right? They want to indulge their flesh, but also reap the rewards of the Spirit. And Ahab is just like that. Yes?
It's like a doctor telling a patient quit smoking because what it's doing to you is harmful, but then they'll go out and keep on smoking.
No, people don't like that.
They'll just
Yeah.
Another thing that came to my mind is you can't sit at the table of demons at the table of Yahweh.
Yeah.
At
No,
the same
for
time.
sure. Yeah. So he says, yeah, there's this dude, his name's Micaiah, but I absolutely hate this guy because every time he's around, he says nothing good. He's like a hellfire and brimstone type of guy, and I don't know, I'm like a sunshine and dandelions type of guy. You know, what can I say? Like, I like shiny golden calves to bow down before, and I like Baal, and this guy just keeps telling me that, like, I'm gonna burn, like, the golden calf that I made in the fire, right? It's like I don't like Micaiah. But Jehoshaphat said, let not the king say so. So once again, Jehoshaphat looks pretty good. He's like, dude, all because you don't like what he says, that doesn't mean you should not listen to him. Right? He's like, no, you should still want to hear from Yahweh. Right? So you see Jehoshaphat actively trying to be like, no, like, all because you don't like it, like, you still need to hear it. Right? It's better to hear the word of Yahweh and not like it than to not hear the word of Yahweh and go do something against Yahweh's will. Right? You need to, sticking your head in the sand is not going to solve your problems. Right? You need to hear the truth and be confronted by it, even if it hurts. That's what Jehoshaphat's saying. So the king of Israel called an officer and said, hasten to bring Micaiah, son of Imlah. And I was like, crud. I tried. He's like, all right, bring out Micaiah. And Micaiah's really popping his knuckles, being like, let's go. Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, were sitting each on his throne, clothed in the royal garments, at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets were prophesying before them. Right, so here they are at the gate of the city where all the major business was done. They each have their seats. Everybody's conducting business. The prophets are there prophesying. And Zedekiah, the son of Kenana, made horns of iron for himself and said, thus says Yahweh, with these you will gore the Arameans until they are consumed. So what does he say?
destroy them.
Yeah. And whose name does he say it in?
Yahweh.
Oh, he's using the thus says Yahweh kind of lingo that most prophets.
Yeah. I mean, he's doing what prophets do, right? He is, now this guy is overtly a false prophet. Because he is speaking in the name of Yahweh, but he is proclaiming something that is overtly false. But people think that most likely this is drawn from Deuteronomy chapter 33, right? Deuteronomy 33 is where Moses pronounces a blessing over the different tribes. And whenever he's prophesying over the tribe of Joseph, which keep in mind, Joseph is Manasseh and Ephraim, right? And Ephraim is the predominant tribe of Israel. And so the stuff that is prescribed to Joseph would oftentimes be associated with with Israel. This is what it says. Blessed of Yahweh be his land, with the choice things of heaven, with the dew, and from the deep lying beneath, and with the choice yield of the sun, and with the choice produce of the months, and with the best things of the ancient mountains, and with the choice things of the everlasting hills, and with the choice things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the bush. Let it come to the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of the one distinguishing amongst his brothers. And as the firstborn of his ox, majesty is his, and his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he will push the peoples all at once to the ends of the earth, and those are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and those are the thousands of Manasseh. So here we have the imagery of a crown, we have the imagery of horns, and we have the imagery of Joseph, the crowned one with the horns of an ox, pushing out the peoples who are invading the land and stealing their property. And so I think what we have here is we have a false prophet who is prophesying falsely by taking scripture out of context, right? He has not actually heard the word of Yahweh to Ahab right here. He is simply taking a positive passage from Deuteronomy and saying, well, hey, you're the king of Israel, and therefore what was said to Israel back in Deuteronomy applies to you, because we know that God desires to bless Israel. And so, here's the horns. God's going to wipe out your enemies. Basically, what he's doing here is the same thing we do with Jeremiah 31, right? 29. Jeremiah 29.
11?
Yeah, sorry. Jeremiah 31 is the New Covenant stuff. Jeremiah 29:11, right? It's the same thing we do, right? Because we go back to Jeremiah 29:11 and we take this verse that is talking about peace and prosperity for the people who are in captivity, that is like going to come to them, and we take that and talk about it nowadays. But you have to figure out what it's saying to the original audience and whether or not that applies to us first. This dude, he is a false prophet because he is blindly grabbing scripture and applying it to Ahab, right? Ultimately, I agree. God will use the crown and the horns of Joseph to push out the enemies. But he's not going to do that for an idolatrous king, right? And so that's an issue there. So Zedekiah pronounces this. He says, with this you will gore the Arameans until you are consumed, right? So he's misusing scripture to encourage him. And he says, thus says Yahweh, because technically Yahweh did say that. But he doesn't say, thus says Yahweh in its original context. He just says, thus says Yahweh. I can do all things with a verse taken out of context.
Okay. Oh, I was going to say that.
There you go.
You're
Sorry.
doing what a lot of people do is like take a verse out of context, slap it on the bumper of your car, call it a day.
Yep. And all the prophets were also prophesying thus, saying, go up to Ramoth Gilead and succeed, and Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king. Right? So they say, hey, you will be successful in all that you do. Peace and prosperity lie in your wake. Go up there. You got this, dude. They're all just sucking up to the king.
It's funny, now they say Yahweh after he mentioned it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Jehoshaphat, like, it's like Ahab's like, hey, guys, make sure you throw the name Yahweh in there. Jehoshaphat likes that type of thing. Right? So they're like, Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. All right, we move on.
Now the messenger who went to summon Micaiah spoke to him, saying, behold now, the words of the prophets, as if from one mouth, are good towards the king. Please let your word be like the word of one of them, and speak that which is good. But Micaiah said, as Yahweh lives, what Yahweh says to me, that I shall speak. Then he came to the king, and the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain? And he said, go up and succeed, and Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king. Then the king said to him, how many times must I make you swear that you will speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh? So he said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains, like sheep which have no shepherd. And Yahweh said, these have no master. Let each of them return to his house in peace. Then the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not say to you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil?
All right. So, here we have Micaiah show up in all his glory. For the sake of time, I realize we need to start picking up this pace because we spent a long time on that beginning part. So let's just break it down. So the messenger who went to summon Micaiah spoke to him, saying, behold now, the words of the prophets, as if from one mouth, are good towards the king. So basically, before they enter over to talk to the kings, this guy's giving Micaiah a warning. He says, dude, I want you to know that you're not the first prophet the king has talked to. The king has already talked to several people, and all of them are in agreement that God is behind this. Please don't disagree with them.
Don't screw this up.
Don't screw this up, man. Right? Just tell the king what he wants to hear. The king was already very reluctant to get you, but Jehoshaphat convinced him. Just go in there and do your job. And my guy's like, oh, I'll do my job. Oh, believe me, I will do it. Please let your word be like the word of one of them and speak that which is good. That's interesting. Speak that which is good. Well, Micaiah is going to speak that which is good. The issue is that sometimes we fail to realize that anything that is not from God is not good.
Yes.
Right? They're using good erroneously here. Speak that which is good. Well, to them, something good is something that's that it tickles your ears.
Yeah.
Right? This is how people are. And so they're saying, just tell him what he wants to hear. Right? That's all you got to do. Don't make the king mad. Well, Micaiah says, as Yahweh lives, what Yahweh says to me, that I shall speak. And Yahweh's not dying anytime soon. Right? Yahweh is the eternal one. As long as Yahweh lives, I will do what Yahweh has told me to do. And as a prophet, that means I will speak what Yahweh has told me to speak. And I will not say what Yahweh has not said. Yes?
Are they referring to, when we talk about Yahweh, are we referring to God the Father, or are we referring to Jesus?
Yahweh is God, just God.
Just God.
In general.
Okay.
Right? So the Father, Son, and Spirit are all Yahweh.
Oh.
Right? Yahweh is just the personal name of God. Yeah. So as Yahweh lives, what Yahweh says to me, that I shall speak. So he says, I don't care what those guys are doing. I'm a prophet. And so, if what Yahweh says to me is in agreement with them, well, then I will agree with them. And then it turns out they were speaking from Yahweh too. But if what Yahweh says through me is contrary to them, then that's all that I'll do. And so the moment of truth comes. Then he came to the king, and the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain? He asked the question. Moment of truth, here we go. And Micaiah says to him, go up and succeed, and Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king. Oh my gosh. I guess God was behind it. And I guess God did want them to go to battle, and all the other prophets were correct. It looks like Micaiah is doing exactly what they asked. He's just agreeing with them. However, Ahab seems to see right through what Micaiah is doing here. Either Micaiah said this in a very sarcastic tone, or he said it in such a dramatic manner that it was very obvious that he was lying, or this was just his common practice to mess with the king. I will take any three of those interpretations because all three of those make Micaiah one of the most fascinating characters ever to me. Because he is either super sassy, super sarcastic, or overtly theatrical. And I love all of those. So he says, go up and succeed, and Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king. And mind you, Ahab was willing to believe this when any other prophet said it to him. But now that Micaiah says this, he knows for a fact that this is a dead-out lie. Right? If anybody else says it to him, he's like, absolutely. But now that Micaiah shows up and actually says good news, he's like, I ain't winning this battle. Ahab says, how many times must I make you swear that you will speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh? That right there tells us so much. Like, this tells us that Micaiah must do this often. Right? He's like, dude, do we have to go through this again? You always come in here and you tease me by telling me something that Yahweh didn't say, and then I have to force you to tell me what he actually said, and what he actually said is never positive. Now you begin to see why Ahab's always annoyed with Micaiah. It's not simply that Micaiah tells him bad news, it's that Micaiah always teases him with good news first. He's like, oh, yes, you're not sinning against God. Oh, that's good to hear. Oh, no, I was joking. You're screwed. It's like, oh. And so this is apparently a regular thing. Right? Micaiah he loves messing with Ahab. And who can blame him? Right? It'd be one thing if Ahab was new to this whole thing and this was his first time sinning. Then it'd be kind of cruel to be teasing him. But Ahab knows that he's a sinner. Right? He has had people confronting him time and time again. At this point, Micaiah's just mocking him. Right? Because he realizes that whether he says what's from Yahweh or whether he doesn't, Ahab's not going to change what he's doing. And so now he's just coming up here and he's like, you'll go and you'll win the battle. Oh, you actually want to hear from Yahweh? Okay, you're going to go and lose the battle. Did that change what you're going to do? No, you're still going to go fight the battle. It's like, so Micaiah just recognizes that his words are falling on deaf ears. And Ahab recognizes this. And so it seems like he just knows that whatever Micaiah says first is not the truth. You got to wait till the second time. And so he's like, dang it. How many times will I make you to swear that you'll speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh? And fun fact, henceforward, every time somebody's on trial, they have to swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I'm kidding. That's not actually where that comes from. I just seemed like a nice like You almost believe me though. I saw somebody all nodding. You're like, wow. No, that's not where that comes from.
The truth. You can't handle the truth.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That whole scene was inspired by this right here.
Yep.
You want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
You will get.
And so Micaiah says, oh, you want to hear actual prophecy? I didn't know you actually wanted to hear the word of Yahweh this time. This is exciting. Okay. And then he starts singing a song. It's like, just taunting him. I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep which have no shepherd. And Yahweh said, these have no master. Let each of them return to his house in peace. Wait, hold up. Who's the shepherd of Israel? Yes, but yeah, the king.
Technically the shepherd, yes.
And so, if the sheep go out to battle and they scatter, What does that imply about scattering?
They don't follow.
Well, no. If you scatter in the midst of a battle, what does that suggest about the battle?
It's not
Not
good.
good.
It means you're not doing pretty good, right? Like it means that you've lost, right? Usually, if you're pursuing, you're not scattering, right? You're fleeing, right? So he sees the sheep scattering because they have no shepherd. Well, hold up, where'd the shepherd go? He's dead. So he says, okay, well, if you actually want to hear from Yahweh, I'm so excited. Let me sing you a song. You're going to go to battle. You're going to lose. You're going to die. Ha, ha, ha. That's kind of what Micaiah sings here. And Yahweh said, these have no master. Theological point there, right? Because Ahab is dead, and they weren't serving Yahweh. They literally have no master, right? They're only serving themselves. Now there is, once again, no king in Israel, because he's going to be dead, and everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. Let each of them return to his house in peace. What type of peace is that? It's like, whoa. You have to wonder, what does he mean by peace here, right? Is it a sarcastic form of peace? Where it's like they literally just lost a battle. They are not at peace. Or is it, hey, good job. You actually have shalom now because you got freed from this stupid king named Ahab, right? It's like it could go either way, right? It could be a legitimate spiritual peace because you've been removed from this tyrant, or it could be just a mocking peace.
Or it could be they were just
Oh yeah, it could be that everybody dies. That's true. The phrase sheep with no shepherd is a common metaphor throughout the Bible, right? The reason why Moses asked God to appoint Joshua is because he doesn't want the people to be like sheep without a shepherd whenever he dies, right? During Jesus' ministry, he sends out the apostles to go and minister to the people of Israel because he doesn't want them to be like sheep without a shepherd after he ascends and he leaves. And ironically, Jesus is ministering during a time period where there is a king named Herod married to a woman named Herodias, who is very much like Ahab and Jezebel, right? And so you have this repeat of sheep without a shepherd, right? And he says that this is what's going to happen. Ahab, you're going to die and the people are going to be without a shepherd. Then the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not say to you that he would not prophesy good concerning me but evil? He's like, bro, I predicted this. To which Jehoshaphat should have said, that actually says more about you than it does Micaiah. Right? This dude, if what he's saying is true, then the only reason he's saying evil stuff is because you haven't repented. Mm-hmm. However, there's a question here, because now we've had two different prophets, both prophesying in the name of Yahweh. And obviously we have good reason to believe that Micaiah is the one in the right, because everything we know about Ahab is that he's not worshiping Yahweh. So why would Yahweh give him the victory? Right? That would just be sending weird mixed signals. Right? And so we have good reason to believe that Micaiah is the genuine prophet, but according to Deuteronomy, how do you know who a genuine prophet is?
If he speaks on behalf of Yahweh, like truly.
Well, yeah, but how do you know if it's true?
If it comes to fruition.
Yeah, if what he says comes to pass. Right? So we already have good reason to believe it's Micaiah, but now it's time to sit back, grab your popcorn, and wait and see. Right? Let's see who comes out on top. Are they going to win or are they going to lose? And that's what Micaiah is going to emphasize here.
Then Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of Yahweh. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing by him on his right and on his left. And Yahweh said, who will entice Ahab, so that he will go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said this, while another said that. Then the Spirit came forward and stood before Yahweh and said, I will entice him. And Yahweh said to him, how? And he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. Then he said, you shall entice him and also prevail. Go out and do so. So now, behold, Yahweh has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all of your prophets. But Yahweh has spoken calamity against you. Then Zedekiah the son of Kenaanah came near and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, how did the Spirit of Yahweh pass from me to speak to you? And Micaiah said, behold, you will see on that day when you enter an inner room to hide. Then the king of Israel said, take Micaiah and return unto Amon, the commander of the city, and to Joash the king's son, and say, thus says the king, put this man in prison and feed him sparingly with bread and water until I come back safely. And Micaiah said, if you indeed return safely, Yahweh has not spoken by me. And he said, listen, all you people.
Micaiah is so cool. I love it. Like, I can't wait to meet Micaiah one day. I'm gonna be like, bro, you got some stories to tell. Like, just let's just sit down and talk.
I feel like he'd be a commentator.
What?
And like,
Oh, wouldn't that be fun?
I feel like he would be that.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you indeed return safely, Yahweh is not spoken by me. It's like, that's such a roast. We'll talk about it. Okay. So Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of Yahweh. Right? So, Ahab's upset about this whole thing. And Ahab's like, dude, I told you that this guy never says anything positive. And Micaiah says, well, I'm not done talking. Not only do I know what Yahweh said, I saw how the conversation went down. Get ready for this. Hear the word of Yahweh. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne. He said, I had a vision of heaven. I saw Yahweh sitting there on his throne and all the host of heaven standing by him on his right and on his left. So here we have Yahweh and his divine council, right? Here he's talking with the other Elohim, right? The other, the divine council of all the different spiritual beings. And this is something that we see all the time. We see it in the book of Job. We see it in the Psalms and stuff like that. And here we have God, and he's going to ask a question, right? It's almost like, it's literally like a council meeting. And Yahweh says, who will entice Ahab so that he will go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? Okay, let's talk about this real quick. Because I could see a phrase like this challenging some people's theology. What is God asking somebody to do?
That Ahab goes to, war, basically? Lose?
Seems like God is giving somebody the job to go and test Ahab, kind of.
Like tempt.
Yeah, it sounds like tempting, right? Lure him in, right?
So where James says God doesn't tempt anyone.
Yeah. This could challenge some people's theology here, but I think there's an answer to it, right? Yeah. And it'll get even more challenging in a second. I won't answer the question now, but just think about that. That might be a bit challenging here, right? Here we have God asking. He's basically saying, whenever he says who will do this, it's an invitation for somebody to volunteer, right? He's talking to his divine council, and he's asking for one of the spirits to volunteer to go do this, right? And so he says, who'll go out there and lure Ahab into battle so he will die? All right. So he says, who will entice Ahab so he will go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said this, while another said that. Right? So apparently amongst the council, there's all talking to one another. They're trying to figure out who should do it. Then the Spirit came forward and stood before Yahweh and said, I will entice him. This is another place where I translated it a little bit differently. Because most translations say then a spirit. But in Hebrew, for some reason, it has the definite article there. So it says then the Spirit. I didn't capitalize the S or anything because I'm not saying it's the Holy Spirit because once again, I don't know. It's weird. I think that's very interesting. Like it says, then the Spirit came forward. It seems like maybe there is a spirit who is just known for enticing people, right?
Kind of like Job or something.
Kind of like Job.
Like
yeah.
Satan.
Like Hasatan, the adversary.
Yeah.
And one thing, whenever you read the book of Job, people will debate about whether or not that is actually the devil himself, or if that is simply one of, more likely it's not actually the devil. It's more likely just a member of the spiritual council that is, like, his job is to, almost be like the adversary, right? Like his job is to do stuff like that. So it could be implying that that's what the spirit is. Like his job is to do things like this, right? He's like a avenging spirit or like a spirit of destruction. So this spirit comes forward and he stood before Yahweh and said, I'll do it. I'll entice him. And Yahweh said to him, how? How are you going to do it? And he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. Well, now this is even weirder. Because isn't God a God of truth? Now not only is he luring somebody, but he's employing somebody to lie through actual prophets. To be fair, it says his prophets, not Yahweh's prophets, Ahab's prophets. But then Yahweh says, you shall entice him and also prevail. Go out and do so. So God gives him the go-ahead. So God is employing somebody to go entice somebody, lure them to destruction, which I feel like that's less hard to wrestle with because we know that God judges people, right? But then it's more difficult because this guy says he's going to do it by lying. And God says, okay, go and do it. How do you reconcile this? And we know for a fact, because we've already seen it, there were some prophets who were saying it in thus says Yahweh fashion. Right? So some were doing it in the name of Yahweh. And it turns out that God endorsed this. And he allowed these people to go and do this. Why do you think God would allow this?
Maybe Ahab has been a bad king.
Well, he has been. But is God going to change his character all because the king's been bad?
It's still gonna stay the same.
I agree.
He's gonna use something that's bad for good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even though what they did was bad, he's gonna use that against Ahab. to teach
True.
him a lesson.
I think there might even be a simpler answer than that, though. I think that this would be a lot harder question if Micaiah never showed up. Right?
That is right.
Because ultimately, what we see here is that God still communicates the truth. Right? And so, he gives Ahab a chance. Like, so basically what he's doing is this. Right? Here, he sends somebody to go, like, let's imagine like it's a bear trap. Right? Imagine that me and Rocky were going for a walk in the woods, and, you know, Rocky was afraid that there might be a bear trap out there somewhere. All right. And then let's imagine that God sent Ben to go tell Rocky that there is no bear trap in the woods. Okay, well, that on itself, that'd be kind of weird, because, like, okay, well, God sent that. But imagine that Sean, or maybe me, I was the one walking with you, right? Imagine I leaned over to Rocky and said, you know, something about how Ben said that seemed kind of sketchy to me, right? And then I said, what if we got a second opinion? And then Sean strolls up, and Sean gives him the actual prophecy, right? Says, there's a bear trap. Well, now he's heard both. And now it's just up to him which one he's going to obey. And he's got to use his judgment to figure out which one's actually hearing from Yahweh. Is it the person who's warning him that he will die? Or is it the one who's just, you know, brown-nosing and trying to get on his good side? Right?
Oh.
And so basically what God's doing is he is saying, yes, I have planted a trap for you. And then he's sending a lying spirit to entice him there, but it's still Ahab's fault for choosing to walk into a trap that he knew was going to be there. Were you say something?
I was going to say the same thing. It's like God's going to give him both opinions, and he has to choose which one he wants to listen to.
Yeah. 'Cause ultimately, that is what it is, right? He's giving them both, but he's also making it clear which one is true, right? Ahab even acknowledges this, right? Because Ahab has made it clear, I don't care about the truth, I just care about what makes me feel good. Which means that he already is, like, his conscience is bearing witness that Micaiah is telling the truth, right? What I was going to say, I was wanting to read this right here, because I like how the commentator summarizes this. There is ultimately no deception here, or more accurately, the deception is completely telegraphed. Yahweh's spirit inspires the prophets to mislead and lure Ahab to his death, but then Yahweh sends Micaiah to tell Ahab that he is being lured to his death. Yahweh sets a trap for Ahab, but politely shows Ahab the trap that he is setting before he springs it. Right? So basically, it's as if me and Rocky go for a walk, and I'm the one who set the bear trap, and I said, hey dude, I know there's a bear trap there, I'm the one who put it there, and then Ben comes up and says, oh, there's no bear trap, and then if I told him, I said, okay, yeah, God allowed him to come here because, like, if I told Rocky, yes, God allowed Ben to come tell you that because he's trying to lure you to your death, but it's not too late, dude. You can still repent, but I can tell you there is a bear trap, right? So he's got, like, ironically, there are 400 voices telling him to go to battle, right, with Ahab. But he has one voice that he has every reason to trust telling him to stay away, right? Whereas those 400 voices telling him to go, he has no reason to trust them, right? And so God is the one who allowed them to entice him, but he gave Ahab every reason to not follow into it, right? And so I think, if anything, we're just seeing the genius of God here. So yes, he is employing lying spirits because he's not going to make Ahab's decision for him, right? It'd be one thing if Micaiah was the only one who talked to him, don't go to battle. That's one thing. But he's giving Ahab a choice, right? He's allowing there to be a temptation. So he's not the one actively tempting him, but he's allowing there to be a temptation there. Because he wants Ahab to choose. And Ahab is going to choose to go against what Yahweh has officially revealed. Yes?
God's giving him free will.
Yes.
He's letting him decide what path he's taking.
Yeah, he's giving him free will, but I think he's also giving him an extra kick. Right? I think he's forcing him to make a choice. Right? Because normal free will would simply just be not even inquiring of Yahweh at all, just make a decision. But instead, he's like, no, I'm going to force you to make a choice. I'm going to, after Jehoshaphat already says he's going to fight with you, then Jehoshaphat's going to say, let's inquire of Yahweh. Right? So you could just go to battle, but I'm going to force you to realize that your decision is between following me or rebelling against me. Right? So it's free will, but God is making it a more definite choice. Right? To where he says, okay, I'm going to make it to where the options are clear. Right? So that when you go into this battle, you have no reason to think it is actually me who told you to do it. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So he's forcing there to be two different voices so that whenever Ahab makes his choice, there's no doubt about what choice Ahab made. Right? This is not simply ignorantly eating from the forbidden fruit. It is actively choosing to walk over there, pluck the fruit, and eat it. Right? That's what's happening. So the Spirit goes out and does it. So now behold, Yahweh has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets, but Yahweh has spoken calamity against you. Right? I think this whole thing would be a bigger issue if Micaiah did not tell him about this. Right? But Micaiah warns him. He says, no, God, he put those lying spirits there to entice you. So God set the trap for you, and I'm here to warn you that the trap has been set. Don't go out there. Right? Then Zedekiah, the son of Kenana, that's such a weird name, Kenana, he came near and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, how did the Spirit of Yahweh pass from me to speak to you? Right? He's like, wow. So here Zedekiah is still asserting that he's a prophet of Yahweh. And he's like, man, boom. He says, I don't know how you're hearing from Yahweh when I'm hearing from Yahweh too. Seems like he has the impression that Yahweh can only speak through one person at a time, which is a very small view of Yahweh. And also, he seems to fail to recognize that he's just been a false prophet this whole time.
I love the kind of imagery there. It's like Micah said, behold, on the day you will see me into the inner room and hide, basically when you die. Yeah.
And Micaiah said, behold, you will see on that day when you enter an inner room to hide.
Oh, you'll see.
Yeah, you'll see, buddy. Right? Because the guy's got, he's just mocking him, right? Just hitting him on the head, and you can tell, Micaiah's outnumbered, right? He can't defend himself. So this dude just comes up, smacks him. Oh, you think you're a prophet, huh? You think you're hot stuff? Since when was God speaking through you instead of me? And Micaiah says, I'm willing to wait. One day, you're not going to be out here at the gate. You're going to be running to an inner room hiding because the Arameans are going to be chasing after your butt, and you're not going to be able to defend yourself. So I'm biding my time. If you don't think Yahweh spoke through me, that's up to you, man. But he did. So you'll see on that day when you enter an inner room to hide. Then Ahab said, take Micaiah and return him to Ammon, the commander of the city, and to Joash the king's son, and say, thus says the king, put this man in prison and feed him sparingly with bread and water until I come back safely. So he says, I'm so done with Micaiah. Take him back, imprison him, don't feed him much food, don't give him much water. I'll deal with him when I get back safely. So he's confident that he's going to be coming back. But then Micaiah says, if you indeed return safely, Yahweh has not spoken by me.
You mean if you come back?
If you come back. Micaiah's looks like I'm serving life in prison. He's like, because if I'm staying in prison until Ahab gets back, well, Ahab ain't coming back, so I better get used to not eating food.
That sounds funny.
He's like, King, this is the last time we're seeing each other. Right? You think you can come back and deal with me later? No. Yeah. If you see me again, then yeah, I deserve to be hit by Zedekiah. And he said, Shema, all you people. Everybody listen up, because you just heard what went down here. Right? So that whenever Ahab does die, it'll prove that Micaiah was a prophet of Yahweh. Let's see how the battle goes down.
So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went up against Ramoth Gilead. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and go into the battle, but you put on your garments. So the king of Israel disguised himself and went into the battle. Now the king of Aram had commanded the 32 commanders of the chariots, saying, "Do not fight with small or great, but with the king of Israel alone." Now it happened that when the commanders of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, "Surely it is the king of Israel." And they turned aside to fight against him. And Jehoshaphat cried out. So it happened that when the commanders of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. Now a certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel in a joint of the armor. So he said to the driver of his chariot, "Turn around and take me out of the fight, for I am severely wounded." Now the battle raged that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot in front of the Arameans, and died at evening, and the blood from the wound ran into the bottom of the chariot. Then a shout of lament passed throughout the camp close to sunset, saying, "Every man to his city, and every man to his land."
Thus dies Ahab, king of Israel. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went up against Ramoth Gilead. Here's another mistake Jehoshaphat makes. I don't know. Because to me, I would think that after hearing from the prophet, he would not go into battle. But to be fair, he's being a man of his word. Right? He did make this promise. And so he's going into the battle. We don't know how Jehoshaphat feels about this. Right? I would assume that Jehoshaphat goes in there warily.
Cautious.
He probably recognizes, oh, crud. Right? Because he's heard about this. Right? He wanted to hear from Yahweh for a reason, and he hears this battle's not going to go well. He probably realizes that he's made a poor decision, but he still goes into battle. You can argue whether or not he should have, but I would lean towards probably should have, since he did promise that. So they both go into battle against Ramoth Gilead. This is so weird to me. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "I will disguise myself and go into the battle, but you put on your garments."
He's condemning himself.
What do you mean?
Like, you can tell that he knows that what Micaiah said was true, and that's why he's like disguising himself.
Oh yeah, but it's so funny though, because like what an idiot. Because
You can't play God.
Well, no, like it's like who's he disguising himself from, right? It's like so he recognizes that what Micaiah says is true, right? He's going to die, and he thinks that putting on a costume and dressing like a normal soldier will hide him from God. Like it's like what? Like yes, it might hide you from the other soldiers, but that's not who you need to worry about, dude. Like you're misunderstanding. God did not say you were going to die because the Arameans knew who you were and killed you. He just said you was going to die because you've been sinning against God. Right? And so you're going to die either way. But he seems to think that he can pull a fast one and just conceal himself by dressing like a normal man. So it makes it look like only Jehoshaphat is out of battle.
He thought it was in the fine print.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. He thinks he's pulling a fast one on God, but it's like, okay, Micaiah just saw a vision of the throne room of God. You think that God, so a man saw a vision of the celestial realm. You think that the God who created the heavens and the earth can't see through your costume? It's like, that's weird. Like, it's just dumb. But he's condemning himself.
And
right?
It's further confirming what Micaiah said is true.
Yeah, because it shows that he is hard-hearted and that he just refuses to listen to God. So he just going in there like you have to wonder what his logic is. Because here he is, he knows what he's doing is stupid. But to be fair, I guess we all do stuff like that. Right? You're like, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this. Why did I do that? Well, never mind. Like that's kind of how we are. So they both go to battle, and Ahab says, I will disguise myself and go to battle, but you put on your garments. You dress like a king, I'll dress like a normal dude. Well, if I was Jehoshaphat, I'd be like, well, hold up. This is your battle. I mean, the main person opposing Aram right now is Israel. If there's only one dude dressed as a king out at battle, and that dude is me, they're going to think that I'm you. And if I was Jehoshaphat, I'd be like, maybe we can both dress in disguise. Like, what? Yeah, because, so just so you know, in army, like in military stuff back then, whenever they would go out to battle, the kings would dress in like their full, like, there would be something that set them apart, right? So that you could tell that was the king. It might not have been the most, savvy move from a political perspective, but I think it was just a code of conduct, really. It was, so that you know, like if anything, if the king was taken out, it would spare a lot of other people from having to unnecessarily die. They would just become slaves or something like that. I don't know. Like, just the fact that Jehoshaphat goes with all this is just so interesting to me. The only reason I could think that he does go with it is because of the promise he made. He said, I am as you are, my people are your people, my horses are your horses. He has declared that Ahab is the commander-in-chief here. And so it seems like Jehoshaphat is just rolling with it. So the king of Israel disguised himself, went into battle. Right? So Ahab, he's fighting. So to be fair, he doesn't like stay away from battle. That'd be a choke move. Right? But he goes into battle, but he disguised himself like a normal soldier. Now the king of Aram had commanded the 32 commanders of his chariots, saying, do not fight with small or great, but with the king of Israel alone. So what did the king of Aram, so the king of Syria, what did he tell his army?
Just fight with the king of Israel, not any other soldier.
He says, the only person I want to kill is Ahab. Right? That's the only person I'm after. Right? I don't care about the other people. If we can take out Ahab, we win the battle. That's all I want.
This is like this has happened at least once, like with King David, right?
Yeah, with Absalom.
With Absalom. I can't remember who it was, but someone was like, just find David.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was with Absalom because that's why this like Joab and them said, David, you need to stay back because if you die, we lose the kingdom, but if we die, we're just men, right? And it makes sense, right? This is like if you take out the king, then the kingdom's gone, right? And so Aram says our number one target is Ahab. If we take out Ahab, we're good to go. And so it happened, when the commanders of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, surely it's the king of Israel. Right? I mean, like, who else would it be? Right? That must be Ahab right there. And they turned aside to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out. Jehoshaphat's like, whoa, 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 whoa. I am not Ahab. I am Jehoshaphat. I am the king of Judah. Stop attacking me. So Jehoshaphat probably thought this idea sounded really good, and he's like, nope, this is, here, let me get my wallet out. Look, there's my ID. I am not Ahab. Don't kill me, bro. And so they're like, oh, where's Ahab at? So it happened that when the commanders of the chariot saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. They're like, oh, well, that's my bad. Sorry. I mean, we don't have any beef with you. No, bro, it's fine. You were just going along with an oath. You don't even want to be here. You go home. We're just looking for Ahab. You know where he's at? Well, I can't tell you where Ahab's at. Okay. God doesn't need them to know where Ahab's at. Look at this. Like, I love this, right? This makes Ahab's death even more humiliating, right? He doesn't get taken out. Like, think about how much more glory there is in being taken out whenever an entire army is focusing on just killing you, right? I mean, that's the way to go. Yeah, an entire army was just seeking me. I mean, of course I died, right? No. Instead, they're going to kill him by accident. Now, a certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel in a joint of the armor.
You know what that reminds me of? I think he was Judges about the rock or something.
Oh, with with Gideon's son. Yeah.
Throw the rock.
Yeah, with Abimelech. Yeah. No, this is hilarious to me, right? All the things that had to happen perfectly. We also learn that Ahab was in a chariot at this point. So Ahab is actively moving. He is in motion, right, across the battlefield. This dude, at random, pulls out a bow and arrow, pulls out an arrow, knocks it. He is aiming at somebody who he presumes to just be a random soldier. He does not know this is the king of Israel. He is just shooting. He's like, okay. And it just happens to land where there's like a break in the armor.
That's amazing.
And it just happens to land in a place in the break of the armor where it happens to be a mortal wound.
Oh.
Right? Because think about it, there are breaks in the armor where, it would like graze your arm and it's not going to kill you. It happens to land at the perfect spot. Ahab can disguise himself from the people. He can't disguise himself from God, though. Mm-hmm. Right? And now Ahab's going to die in the most embarrassing way possible. Right? It'd be so cool to be like, just like in the afterlife, being like, yeah, I died whenever an entire army tried to hunt me down and kill me. That'd be cool. So now he's in the afterlife saying, so how'd you die? Well, I was afraid of those people, so I hid like a little weenie and disguised myself with the regular soldiers, and some random dude accidentally shot me and it got through my armor and I died. I mean, that's embarrassing. So this dude, who he was so focused on bringing glory to himself, and he dies with no glory whatsoever. It's like, ah. Vengeance is mine, declares the Lord.
Amen.
Now the battle raged that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot in front of the Arameans. Oh, sorry. So he said to the driver of his chariot, "Turn around and take me out of the fight, for I am severely wounded." He's like, "Crud, crud, crud, go, turn around." I think Micaiah was correct. He's like, "This is not good." So the battle raged that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot in front of the Arameans, and he died at evening, and the blood from the wound ran into the bottom of the chariot. Look at that. He doesn't die in the middle of an amazing fight. He gets hit by an arrow, and he says, "Crud, crud, crud," and he leaves, and he's just left sitting there. Right? Everybody else is back out fighting. He just dies alone, blood seeping out, turning into a pool in the chariot, and then eventually, I guess, whenever they're stripping down the soldiers, they're like, "Oh, crud, it's the king." Well, he's dead. Then a shout of lament passed throughout the camp, close to sunset, saying, "Every man to his city, and every man to his land." So everybody's returning back home for rest.
Each to their own house.
Yep.
So the king died, and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. And they washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood. Now the harlots bathed themselves there, according to the word of Yahweh which he spoke. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab, and all that he did, and the ivory house which he built, and all the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son became king in his place. Now Jehoshaphat the king of Asa became king over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shili. And he walked in all the ways of Asa his father. He did not turn away from doing it, doing what is right in the sight of Yahweh. However, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burnt incense on the high places. Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel.
Very cool. And so here we get to see the end of Ahab and the beginning of, well, really the story of Jehoshaphat, right? So I told you how we were going to come back to Jehoshaphat towards the end. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. What is the significance of Samaria?
It's the capital of Israel?
Yeah, bingo. It is the capital of Israel, right? So Samaria is to Israel what Jerusalem is to Judah. And so the king dies, and he is taken back and buried in Samaria. Once again, he dies with no glory. He dies like, that's just such, like, it's like, we don't value it as much nowadays, but you have to understand like how much shame was associated with his death in ancient cultures. We don't like the whole honor shame culture thing in the past. We just don't really understand that nowadays. But like, what a way to go! That's just so embarrassing. Because he died like fending for his own life, right? I mean, like he was like, this is not what a king's supposed to do. Hiding amongst the ranks of the soldiers. That is embarrassing. You're supposed to dress in regalia so that if anybody goes down, it'll be you instead of your men. But instead, he hid himself like a little punk and still died. Right? So not only does he die an embarrassing and shameful death, but he dies an embarrassing death. And he dies a coward's death. Right?
Well, that's further emphasized by the imagery, like his blood was licked up by the dogs, and his chariot is washed with a harlot's babe.
Exactly. Which actually, that language calls back to something that we read in last week's, or 2 weeks ago's chapter. So the king died, was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. And they washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood. Now the harlots bathed themselves there, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke. The imagery of that is just so, like, dark. Right? I mean, like, this is, like, 1 Kings is not a PG book. Right? The idea of, I mean, like, Ahab was bad, right? Like, we can agree that Ahab's bad. But just for a moment, try to empathize with the people of Israel. Right? Their king just died in battle. And now the last real image that we have of Ahab is of these people who are lamenting, taking the king's chariot back to this pool, right? And they're just scrubbing away the blood. But even the blood, like, they're not scrubbing this away at like a royal palace or something like that. They're doing it at a place where harlots would go and wash themselves, right? This is not like upper class, right? This is not an upper class area, right? Harlots are the low people of society, right? This is where just like the people who sold their bodies for money, these people, they go to bathe there, right? This is where even they, I don't know, it's a very shameful place. And then as they're washing the blood away, the dogs are just licking it up. It's a very gross image, according to the word of Yahweh which he spoke. This is almost fulfilled word for word, with one key exception. Let me flip to it real quick so I can get to that. Oh, and just so you know, verses 41 through 53 we can go through really quickly because those are just like summary things. So we'll be able to go through that pretty quick if you're looking at the time and being like, whoa, how are we going to get through this? So let me see, where was it that... Okay. Then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Arise, go down to meet Ahab the king of Israel, who is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. You shall speak to him, saying, Thus says Yahweh, Have you murdered and also taken possession? And you shall speak to him, saying, Thus says Yahweh, In the place where the dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, the dogs will lick up your blood, even yours. So the main difference is just the location, right? It said, in the place where the dogs licked up the blood of Naboth. Well, they're not in that place. And the reason why is because, remember that chapter ended with Ahab repenting, right? So it was, he didn't have to die in that place. But he still met the same fate, right? So God said, you will meet a shameful and embarrassing death, and even your blood won't be respected. Sure enough, dogs are licking it up. It's like, I don't know, like this, like it's very embarrassing, but also it's just such a sad end of the story, right? No matter how bad Ahab is, I don't want us to just villainize people. I want us to try to have compassion. And you read it, you're like, oh, I wouldn't wish this upon anybody. But God can do as he wishes. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab, and all that he did, and the ivory house which he built, and all the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? To which we would say, probably, because once again, we don't have that book. We have the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, assuming that the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah is the same one that it refers to in here. Because 1st and 2nd Chronicles is specifically focusing on the kings of Judah, not on Israel. So Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son became king in his place. And as you can see, we are in in 853 BC. Right, that's where we're at. We are now with Ahaziah right down there. That being said, you'll notice that Ahab started reigning whenever Asa was still king over Judah. And now we need to go back and talk about Jehoshaphat, who we already met. So we can go through this quickly. Now Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, became king over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Right? So if Ahab started reigning in 874 BC, Jehoshaphat became king in 870 BC. Right? However, you're going to notice that there's something a little bit confusing here. Right? Because then it says, Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. But you'll notice that 870 to 848 is not 25 years. And basically, I've kind of talked a little bit about chronology with y'all. Scholars have to work all this chronology out. And this one is one of the trickier ones. But what most people believe is that these are actually referring to two different little times here. Because what most people would believe is actually that Jehoshaphat's reign actually began a little bit earlier than 870, and that he actually had a co-regency with his father Asa for a little bit. Because I know this is a long time ago, but if you remember, Asa was a really good king, but eventually he had this illness that broke out on his feet, and that's how his story ended. Well, many people have suggested that what probably happened is that whenever he became ill, there were probably 3 years in there where Jehoshaphat co-reigned with him, right? Which then led into, once Asa died, Jehoshaphat fully taking over. And so that's how you would reconcile there being a full 25 years there, but also it being the 4th year of Ahab's reign and stuff like that, if that makes sense, right? And so there's other ways that you can reconcile it as well, but that's usually the most common one that people go with. So Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king. He reigned for 25 years in Jerusalem. So how old was he when he died? 35 plus 25?
70?
Nope.
50?
Nope.
60.
60. There you go.
Right after me, Maverick.
And his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. Azubah's a fun name. It's better than Kamala or whatever. And he walked in all the way of Asa, his father. He did not turn away from it, doing what is right in the sight of Yahweh. That's good praise. Right? So Asa was a good king, and Jehoshaphat, like Asa, was a good king. And if you want to read more about Asa, you can actually go to Chronicles. And Asa and Jehoshaphat, you can read more about both of them in Chronicles, to where, especially Jehoshaphat, it actually details a lot more details of what all Jehoshaphat did. However, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burnt incense on the high places. Okay, so he wasn't perfect. He did mess up. He didn't fully reform Israel, but he did do a pretty good job. Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel. And this actually does seem to be viewed as a positive thing. Right? So in addition to those other things, he did make peace. That's good. Should he have agreed to go to battle with him? Probably not. But at least the people of God are no longer at each other's necks. Right? It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they do. It doesn't mean that you're joining them in their evil. But if you can stay faithful to Yahweh and also be at peace with those who are not, that's good. Right? Like as long as you are not sacrificing your faithfulness, we're good to go. Right? And so this is actually a positive thing. He's taking steps in the direction of actually mending things. Final verses of chapter 22.
Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, and his might which he showed, and how he warred, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And the remnant of the male cult prostitutes who remained in the days of his father Asa, he purged from the land. Now there was no king in Edom. A deputy was king. Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir for gold, but they did not go for the ships. Were broken at Ezion-Geber. Then Ahaziah the son of Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, "Let my servants go with your servants in the ships." But Jehoshaphat was not willing. And Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of his father David. And Jehoram his son became king in his place. Ahaziah the son of Ahab became king over Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. And he did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and walked in the way of his father, and in the way of his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. So he served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger, according to all that his father had done.
I noticed something. It says he ruled, or Uzziah ruled 3 years, I believe, or 2. It said he ruled 2 years, but then 853 minus 852 is only 1.
It's inclusive, yeah. So
okay.
It'd be like, so it's not 2 full years. It's probably about 1.5 years or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So once again, is that not a weird place to just end 1 Kings? Like, I'm not going to rant about this too much. You know what? I'll save it for the end. We'll get there. It's just such a weird place to end it for me. So the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat and his might which he showed and how he warred, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Well, if this book is the same one that we have as 1st and 2nd Chronicles, then we would say yes, because you can read about Jehoshaphat there. It could be that we're talking about 2 totally different books, because most people would say that the book of Chronicles was actually written later, but we don't know, right? And the remnant of the male cult prostitutes who remained in the days of his father Asa, he purged from the land. So not only was he like Asa, but he was even better, right? So like Asa, he was faithful to Yahweh. Like Asa, he didn't get rid of all the high places, but unlike Asa, he did get rid of all the male cult prostitutes, which is good, right? And so he did something even better, right? Because in case you didn't know, and if you didn't know this, then I failed you, male cult prostitutes are bad, right? Cult prostitutes in general are bad, but male cult prostitutes are even worse, because typically the people who are going to the temples would be men, and so not only do you have them sleeping with prostitutes in the name of God, but they're sleeping with prostitutes of the same gender in the name of God, and that's all sorts of messy stuff, right? So none of that should be there, and he got rid of them, which is good. Now there was no king in Edom. A deputy was king. Ooh, that's kind of cool to know. The reason why it shares this is because basically what we're going to see in this section here is that it seems like because there is no king in Edom, Jehoshaphat has made Edom into a client. Basically, it's
Vassal.
a vassal state, right? And this is going to explain something because the place where they're talking about in a second, that is in Edom's territory, and so it's explaining why Jehoshaphat seems to have possession over it. Because there was no king in Edom, and seemingly at this time period, the person in highest office was just a deputy that was probably appointed by Jehoshaphat, right? And so he has basically conquered Edom at this point, which probably suggests that Jehoshaphat's being faithful because they're spreading territory, which is good. So there was no king in Edom, a deputy was king. Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir for the gold, but they did not go, for the ships were broken at Ezion-Geber, right? Ezion-Geber, that is in the land of Edom, right? So once again, if you're looking at a map, you've got Syria up here, you've got Israel, you've got Judah, you got the Dead Sea over here, and Edom is just south of the Dead Sea, right? And most likely, I'm assuming the area we're dealing with here is actually the Red Sea. I'm assuming that's the territory we're dealing with. I think Ophir is one of those places where we don't know exactly where it's at.
Yeah, we don't know.
But I think it's it wasn't mentioned back in Genesis. We had this whole discussion.
It was with Solomon. Oh, Ophir may have been mentioned in
Yeah,
Genesis.
because I think we talked about it with Genesis and we talked about it with Solomon building the temple. Because we were trying to figure out where the place with all the gold is. He was wanting to go down there to get gold, but they couldn't because the ships were broken. And Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, "Let my servants go with your servants in the ships." So, you got Ahaziah, Ahab's son, coming down and be like, "Hey, dude, let's partner up. We'll help you fix these ships up, and we'll go down to Ophir and get that gold." So he's saying, let's do something together. And I love what this tells us about Jehoshaphat. He learns from his mistakes. But Jehoshaphat was not willing. That tells you so much. He was like, "Bro, 2 years ago, I was with your pappy out at war, and he died. And I knew he was going to die because Micaiah told him he was going to die." So, he's like, "No, I'm not going with you. No, it's all right. I will have peace with you, but I'm done doing things with y'all." Anytime a kingdom of Israel gets involved with something, it doesn't go well. And so he's like, "Yeah, no thanks. I'll just, the ships can stay broken. It's fine." And so I like that Jehoshaphat learned from his lessons. He's like, "Yeah, I'm going to keep the kings of Israel, you're cool, but I'm going to keep my distance," right? That's kind of what he's doing there. And Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of his father David, and Jehoram his son became king in his place. And so now we're dealing lower down there. Jehoram becomes king in 848 BC. We'll talk about him in 2 Kings. Which then leads us to the final paragraph of 1 Kings, which sounds like it's setting up a whole new thing, only to just be like a tease. Oh, maybe that's what they're doing. It's a cliffhanger, but kind of a boring cliffhanger. If anything, there's so many other... Sorry, here's my rant. There's so many other places they could have stopped this, right? They could have stopped it at the end of verse 50, and that would be fitting, right? Because we've been talking about the kings of Israel for so long. Tell us about one king of Judah and then end it. That makes sense. If you're wanting some dramatic tension, end it back whenever Micaiah said, "If I see you again," if I see you again, then God hasn't spoken through me. Like, if it ended there, then you're like, dramatic tension. Let me just read into 2 Kings. But instead, they tell us about this random dude who's only going to reign for 2 years. I'm like, this is the weirdest random place to stop a book. I don't know. And the reason I rant about this, okay, so most books of the Bible were their own thing, right? But 1st and 2nd Samuel was originally one book, Samuel, right? 1st and 2nd Kings was originally one book, Kings. 1st and 2nd Chronicles was originally one book, Chronicles, right? Later on in church history, people just split them up. That's why I'm ranting about this, because I just think it's funny. Okay, so Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, became king over Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel, right? And so Jehoshaphat became king in 870. Ahaziah becomes king around 853. Also, just because we're talking about, we mentioned the whole inclusive years and stuff like that, that also could explain some of the chronology details, because it doesn't tell us what month these kings became kings. And so it could be that you get 1 year off, because they're just saying 2 years, and they're not telling us whether or not that is 24 months or 13 months, right? If it's over 12 months, they call it 2 years. And so that does kind of mess up the chronology a little bit. The main way we fix it is by looking at when it says, it tells us it was the 17th year of so-and-so, and reigned 2 years, and like you're just comparing all of those to make them line up, if that makes sense. So that's how that's the chronology we have to work with. And surprise, surprise, he's the king of Israel. He did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and walked in the way of his father, and in the way of his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. Right? So the way of his father is who? Ahab, who was terrible.
Yes,
And then the way of his mother was who?
Jezebel.
Jezebel, who we still haven't dealt with her yet, have we? And so Jezebel, also terrible. And then Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Who was that? First king of Israel. Right? So whenever they, like, this is the guy who took them away from Rehoboam. Right? Remember Solomon's son, Rehoboam? Jeroboam was the one who God promised the kingdom of Israel to. But Jeroboam squandered it by building the 2 golden calves and appointing his own priesthood and making his own religion and stuff like that. And so, just like all the kings of Judah are compared back to David, who is the quintessential king of all Israel, so the kings of Israel are compared back to Jeroboam, because David is the picture-perfect example of being faithful to Yahweh. Jeroboam is the picture-perfect example of being an idolater. And so the kings of Israel are always going to be compared back to Jeroboam, because that's who they all model themselves after, because none of them are good. So he served Baal and worshipped him and provoked Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger according to all that his father had done. And thus ends the book of 1 Kings. I think we actually talked about some application along the way there, because it's very easy with Ahab and what was going on there. And so we're going to stop right there. And like I said, Lord willing, next week we will be gathered here once again for Sean to kick off 1 Peter with us. And I'm excited. Like, just so you know, I'm not doing any preparation for this. Like, I mean, I've read 1 Peter several times and stuff like that, but I'm probably going to talk just as much, because y'all know me. But I'm excited to just kind of chill out and just, let Sean do his thing. But we're going to do 1 Peter, and he can go as long as he wants with that. He can go do it all in 1 week, or he can spend 3 years doing it. Maybe not 3 years. Please don't do 3 years. But then the plan is, after we finish 1 Peter, to go back into 2 Kings. And I don't know if we're going to end up doing this or not, but when we get to 2 Kings, I would like to also, along the way, because once we get to 2 Kings, we're also getting to the time period that is going to line up with the Old Testament prophets. And I think it'd be good to, maybe every few weeks, whenever we get to the time period of a certain prophet, to take a week off and look at that prophet's book, right? So that we don't, we're not going to probably do, an in-depth study through Isaiah, because that's 66 chapters, and that would take a long time. We could do that one day, I don't know. But I'd like to do, overviews of those, so that you could see where they fit chronologically into the story, right? Because I think that'd be helpful. I think I'd find it helpful, and it would hopefully be helpful to y'all too. So that's the plan. Sound good? Sean, will you close us out in prayer?
Father God, thank you for allowing us to gather here and go through your word. I pray that we will take these words to heart, and that you will help shape our lives, not just here, but we take this out to the world, and we live our lives differently as changed people, and that we just glorify you in all that we do and live our lives for you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Now go out and be like Micaiah.